Welcome again to the Digging Deep project. This is our monthly webinar, and this month's topic is resilience. We had a very popular blog just recently by Dr. Kristi Pikiewicz on our site, and that inspired us to run this webinar to look at a little bit more in depth what that blog said and what can be done about resilience, because I know from personal experience, people say, oh, you're such a strong person. And I just know that that's not the case. It's not that you are strong or not, or resilient or not, but you can actually do something to build your resilience. And I think that's something that we're going to be talking about. And I will let Kristi introduce herself shortly, because we have a bunch of people, I think, that we've never met before. So thank you all very much for joining us today. And Kristi, do you want to do a short introduction about your background and why you're with this project?
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm Kristi Pikiewicz. I am a former middle school and elementary school teacher. Before that, I worked for Outward Bound and various other guiding companies where I was able to help people go gently outside of their comfort zone and then come back in and reflect, and then keep doing that until our comfort zone gets bigger and bigger, which fits perfectly in terms of resilience, because I think that is such an important key factor. I have seen clients individually in my office, but now I'm currently working in a school as a school psychologist for a K-8 private independent school. And I'm having a lot of fun. I'm supporting parents, I'm supporting teachers, and I'm working right with students for social emotional learning in their classrooms. So we're actually in person right now. We're outdoors, which is a little chilly because it's 9 degrees right now in Colorado, but our kids are bundled up and we're trying to make the most of our current situation. So I hope we can do that for everyone.
Great. Well, let's start by getting into this. What is resilience?
It's a great question. So I'll start with how it's seen or felt. So if we have two people, let's say we have Bob and Jim, and they both experience something significant. So I'm calling here from Colorado. So the wildfires are a perfect example. So if Bob and Jim have a major experience, like the wildfire seems to be coming in close to their home, you might have the same external stimulus, but each person reacts very differently. So after the initial threat of the forest fire has now gone down because it's more contained, Bob may experience no lasting effects of that anxiety, of that potentially difficult situation, of that disruption, versus Jim, he might experience traumatic things such as nightmares, difficulty sleeping, buying lots of fire alarms, all of these pieces where his body is still in that fight or flight state. He isn't able to quickly go down and regulate himself. So that's how it's seen or felt. Now, the trick is how did that come to be? So again, like I said before, I used to work for Outward Bound, so we did a ton of hiking and a ton of backpacking. And if you can imagine, again, Bob and Jim, if we're out hiking, it's sort of like Bob, we're both going on a 10-mile hike, a 10-mile backpack. Bob has plenty of food, he has plenty of water, he has plenty of, he's warm enough, he's in a good space. He could experience a 10-mile hike of something that's difficult, but he's able to keep his body going. He's able to keep, sustained and actually have an overall pretty difficult but positive experience. Versus, again, our same person of Jim, if we're talking in terms of resilience, that's like taking away some of those key resources. So Jim's bucket is a little bit more empty. He might not have food, or he might not have as much water, or he might not have proper clothing on that same 10-mile hike. So Jim's experience of the 10-mile hike is much more strenuous, is much more difficult, is much harder to get through. It probably takes him longer to get through it because he doesn't have food, water, those types of things. Versus Jim, still difficult, but is able to push through. I hope I didn't mix those names up. I think I did. I think you get the point though. So resilience is sort of that, the food and water, the ability to push through or continue through even really hard situations.
All right, thank you for that. So I've known, as I said before, people to say, oh, you're so strong. And it really annoys me, because I think that there's like this sense of some people are just stronger than others. and things may slide off them like water on a duck's back. But I don't think that people are born strong. I think you have no choice but to become stronger when there's adversity. What's your opinion on that?
Yes, I think what your friends or your family were trying to do is to encourage you, to say that they believe in you because they've seen that you've pushed through these 10-mile hikes before and they know you can do it. Now, the trick is that's not always super helpful when someone's in the middle of the 10-mile hike, if someone's in the middle of adversity. So their heart is in the right place, but perhaps what's more useful is really acknowledging, yeah, this is a long go. This is hard. What can I do to help? I see that you're struggling. What do you need? And again, you can't always, as the person in the middle of the hike, you can't always verbalize it. So playing around with some things like, what do you need? And when the answer is like, oh, I'm fine, maybe you still drop by and bring coffee. Maybe you still leave a casserole outside. So as a friend, as someone who wants to help and support, sharing with them that they know, they believe in you, you've got this, but then also that caring and nurturing, because you are still going on that hike, even if it seems like you've done these before and you can get through it. So I think their heart's in the right place.
I think so too, but it's still sometimes a bit, as you say, when you're in the middle of it, that's not really the first thing you might want to hear, even though it's a good effort. So, what are some of the things that you can remind yourself to still stay positive during a difficult time? Because, as you said, it is really hard. And when you're in the thick of it, sometimes it's just really tough to then remind yourself that you can do this, and to remind yourself, to keep a positive attitude no matter what's happening. What are some tips and tricks?
I think with a lot of mental health concerns or a lot of social emotional learning, it's really important to have the language around it. So I love using growth mindset with both adults and children. So the idea is we're not done hiking yet. This idea that this is where we are right now, but it's not where you're going to always be. So it's really a big piece of perspective. So here's where we are now. It's hard. Let's talk about it. Let's learn about it, but know that this isn't our final destination. So again, that idea of hope, or the idea of looking towards the future and creating that future that you want, instead of some more goal oriented, instead of just letting things keep colliding into your life. So I think the best help is language. So learning how to speak in terms of growth mindset is super helpful.
And we have a bunch of parents that I know, that I see from here, that are on this webinar as well. So is there like an age where you think you could start maybe giving them those tools? You talked about food and water and all those kinds of things for a hike. I mean, that's something that potentially you could prepare before a hard time arrives, right? Is there something that we can do as parents, to reinforce resilience? Ideas
Absolutely.
before you need it.
So, I'm not sure how popular this is, but from an object relations standpoint, the opportunity happens right at birth. So the idea that when a child gives you a big emotion, so when an infant is feeling something like hunger, they just give it to you. And you as a parent, you pull them in, you calm them, you soothe them, you change that big emotion into something more calming. Those are the initial founding steps of learning how to self-regulate. Now, as the child gets older, it seems really counterintuitive, but every opportunity that you can give them to have control, to have mastery over their own world, over their own lives, builds those tools, builds that resilience. So for example, with my own kids, when we're heading out the door when they were little, oh my goodness, I wanted to get in there and tie their own shoelaces, put on their jacket, zip it up for them, because we wanted to get out the door. And it was really hard because sometimes I just had to do that because we're running late. But anytime that I could take a second and allow them to tie their own shoelaces, even though it takes 10 minutes, to zip their own jacket up, even though that can, end in tears and one person's hot and the other kid's not. All of those pieces are ways for children to feel like they've got this, that level of self-assuredness, self-confidence. I can do hard things, in other words. So you want to build in those opportunities from the very earliest stages of you've got this. That's the message. Not be careful, not stay safe, but I believe in you. Whoa, look at that. You did that. And also being able to handle that they're going to fail. Like if you're encouraging them to gently go outside their comfort zone, they're going to climb to the top of a play structure and one day they might fall. And that's so hard. You just want to pick them up and just protect them. But sometimes the best protection is actually letting them fall, being there for them, and then saying, can we do this again? Let's get back up. Let me come with you. So that they know that even if something's difficult, they can do it because, I'm a big kid, I've got this. But also, even if I fail, I know I can regroup and then re-engage. So both of those skills can be taught from the youngest of ages and really should be. And then as you get into these difficult situations, like we're currently in with the pandemic, reflecting back on, remember like when you went to that rock climbing gym, remember how many times you fell before you were actually able to get that climb? That's just like this. So online learning's hard. That's okay. We can do hard things. You're not going to always get it right, but when we fall, we're going to get back up as a family. So all of that is just putting that food and water, those tools in their tool basket that they'll reach for every time something difficult comes up, I hope.
That's a really good point. And maybe you also have like an example for, building that up when it comes to like emotional troubles and emotional challenges that these young folks may have?
Absolutely. So for emotional well-being, again, a key component is building in the language. How do these big emotions feel in your body? So from the youngest child, when you're feeling anger, I feel your jaws tighten, your fists are tightened. I hear those words like, that's not fair. Like, is that how, what you say when you're angry? Yes. Oh, great. So we're building in the language so children are able to talk about it. And as adults in the house, you're modeling that. Then the next step, so there's only three. The next step is how big are you feeling that emotion? So you're feeling anger. Is it in here? Is it here? Is it 0 to 5 range? Is it 5 to 10 range? So kids are able to start to recognize that when they're feeling any emotion, even joy, in that big range, it feels really dysregulating. You can't think, you can't connect, you can't learn. So we really need to start to recognize when we're starting to get towards that edge of feeling something big. And then you need to reach into that toolbox again. What do you need to do to soothe? Are you feeling sad? Do you need a quiet place to read? Are you feeling angry? Do you need to go for a jog with the dogs? Are you feeling scared? Do you need to sit for a second and to think about what the first day of school will look like before you're ready to go? So our hope is that as the children get older, they can start to say, I'm starting to feel a little bit angry. I need to go for a walk. Or I'm starting to feel a little bit sad. I need a minute by myself. And for parents not to over intrude, to let them have that independence, that social emotional growth that they need to be able to self-regulate. Because we don't want the first time that they try that when they're away at college. We want them to try to play with self-regulation when they're still in our house, when we still can help, regroup if we need to sort of surround them with some love and support.
And so you talk a lot about the toolbox, right? But for resilience itself, so this is a two-part question. How could you, as a parent, explain to a younger kid what resilience even is and why that is important for them?
That's an excellent question. I really love it. I personally, and I could be wrong, so if other people have other feelings or emotions on this, I would love to hear about it.
Yeah, and they can type it into the chats here, by the way, if anybody has any questions or even comments as well.
Please jump in, because this is just my opinion on this one. When I teach SEL for my K through 8th graders, our focus in K through 3, even getting into 4th grade, I don't really use the word resilience so much, because in my mind, we're building the foundation. We're building that ability to know how you're feeling, how big you're feeling, what you need, what tools you need. And we're just filling that toolbox. Not overwhelming. What I mean by filling the toolbox is we're giving lots of suggestions, and then we're letting the students pick and choose which ones work best for them. So everyone might not actually soothe with having a nice deep breath. They may actually need something that revs them up, like going for a jog and then coming back, and they'll be more regulated. So really giving students a lot of experiences so that they know this is what helps me, so that as they move into 4th, 5th, 6th grade, they're able to really say, I'm starting to feel angry. I really need to back away and I need to read a book, versus someone else who's saying, I'm feeling angry. I need to disengage or back away and I need to go for a jog. So hopefully by the time they're in fourth grade, they start to actually use those resilient skills without even having that label. But now that we're in fourth grade, we start to label it. So our fourth and fifth graders, we start to play with things like journaling, doing things like Shadow's Edge. We also use things like the hero's journey. So the idea that you're going to encounter difficult things and we can get over them. We can jump over hurdles. We also encourage, as we move to our middle school, not just journaling in the moment, but also that reflection piece that Shadow's Edge offers so nicely. So this is how you're doing now, but can you relate to how some other people were talking about how they're doing because you went through a similar experience? How can you lean in and help and support them? So to me, that's why I'm so excited to be working for this project, is because of all of those components. And it's not just targeting randomly, it's really targeting developmentally appropriate for preteens, teenagers, and young adults, exactly what they need to do to reflect on resilience so that they're slowly just acquiring it, almost like tricking them. Like they don't even know that that's what the skills that they're doing is, reflecting and things like that are doing, is building resilience, but it is. So I can't say enough about Shadow's Edge. It's just such an incredible resource for kids and young adults.
We all have things thrown at us in life, right? I mean, especially that, I feel like at least now there's a sort of an acceptance for everybody in the world that sometimes people go through really tough times and there's illnesses or accidents and all kinds of stuff happening to us. So at least that knowledge is a little bit more out there, I think. So what do you think is the difference in building resilience when there's like really, really tough things going on, like COVID, or like maybe somebody that has cancer or a parent that is dying, between that and just generally what you do in a daily life?
It's right. So there's that old, I think it's a folk tale where the person has that corn stalk and every day they jump, from when it's a seed, they jump over it. And then as it grows, before you know it, you're jumping over things that you never thought you could. And I think in general, and I get this belief, and that's why I liked working with Outward Bound so much and why I love rock climbing and things like that. I think people are so much stronger and more capable than they ever realize. And I really do believe that. So even big traumas will have a huge disruption in your life, will have a huge impact on you. I'm not denying that in any way, shape, or form, even if you're a very resilient person. But if you're able to engage with the material, engage with the feeling, engage with both the content of what's going on with the emotional experience of what you're having, so bringing those two, merging those two together, it won't be stored in your brain as a trauma, which is isolated, which is sort of that idea like, oh my gosh, there's a saber-toothed tiger behind me. I need to remember everything about, the current situation because this is a huge, big deal, so that, it's a safety, fight or flight thing. If you're able to merge your story with what's happening emotionally for you, it won't be locked in your brain in that trauma way, which is so critical in terms of being able to get through even really big things. Again, it goes back to, Rosemary, what you're saying, like, it's not that you're not going to experience devastation or disruption. It's just that you're going to have these tools, have these resources, and be able to be in that difficulty so that you can then get through it, instead of having that difficulty be this hot part in your brain that triggers other red flags like loss of sleep, loss of appetite, difficulty engaging with things you used to love, all of those pieces. You don't have to have those symptoms necessarily.
And you talk in your article about positive rumination. And so when you're in the thick of that, as you talked about, can you talk a little bit about some of those tools that people can focus on when they're really in the middle of it, when they're in this whirl of negativity, how do you get out of that loop, that spin in your head?
Yes, exactly. So our brains are definitely hardwired to look for the negative, which helped us evolve, helped us all stay alive, is incredibly critical and important. And it's an incredible thing to be aware of. So not just for you, but also for people you love and for your children and for your pets, like all of those pieces, knowing that that startle response, that fight or flight response is hardwired. It's just a reaction, and that's okay. So what I would say, again, I hate to just, keep going back to it, but being able to take some time in your life. So obviously Thanksgiving is coming, this idea of gratitude. Our holidays may look different, and that's okay. What's important about Thanksgiving? What are you grateful for? Maybe taking a minute with something like a tool like Shadow's Edge or old-fashioned pen and paper. What happened in your life? Like, what are you working on? What are you processing? But then intentionally saying, like, who are the people in my life who are allies? Who are the people in my life who are just, keep helping me float? What are the situations in my life that I truly am grateful for right now? And at first, it might be something small, like my heater's working and I'm warm, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be equal to the difficulty you're going through. It just has to be this awareness that in the middle of all of this, you also have all of this. I think Mr. Rogers said like something like, in those tragedies, I look for the helper people. I look for the people who see something really difficult happening, who are leaning in. And that's, every time I get overwhelmed by something difficult, I look for those ways. How can I lean in? How can I help? How can I fill my bucket when all of this stuff is just gently leaking from my bucket?
That makes sense. And so those are some very practical things that you mentioned. What are some practical things that parents could say or avoid saying when, their young ones are going through some challenge, maybe to help them reposition some of their feelings?
Well, I'll speak for myself. As a parent, I find it really difficult. I love my kids from the top of my hair to the bottom of my toes, and when they're going through something hard, I want to lean in. I want to help. I'm Italian, so I want to cook. I want to feed them. I want to get in there and I want to comfort them and show them how much I love them. And for me, it's really hard to be able to step back and realize that sometimes the best way for me to show that I love them is for them to able to get through it themselves, to just go through that hard thing. And just instead of getting in there and getting involved, just sort of monitor it. There's a wonderful book, it's called Untangled. And she has this great metaphor where she says, like, she's like the outside, the perimeter of the deep end of a swimming pool. And the kids come over to the swimming pool, the edge, and they check in with you and they connect with you. But then they go out to the deep end. And as a parent, your heart's racing because you're like, oh my gosh, can you swim? Is this going to be okay? Like, you're working so hard. What can I do to help? But what you have to do is you have to just watch from the sideline. They have to be able to come in and out as they need you, not as you need them. And for me, that's the hardest part. And that's the piece that I'm always working on with my kids. And I'm always messing up and I always apologize because sometimes I give them too much freedom and they fall and it's wrong. And I say, I'm sorry. And I lean in, I say, how can we do this differently? And then other times I just have to get out the door. We have to get to the grocery store. And I'm sorry, I'm just picking you up and I'm grabbing the shoes in one hand. And here we are, we're driving. So knowing that you're human and that you're flawed is actually a wonderful gift, because my children are going to eventually be in relationships of their own later someday. And he or she that they're involved with are going to mess up sometimes. So I don't want them to think love means this perfect person. I want them to picture love as messy, and when you make mistakes, you take ownership and responsibility, like all of those pieces. That's what's hard for me. I want to just make things easy for my kids, and you can't do that and then also build resilience. You can't do that and also make kids feel like they're in control of their lives and self-sufficient. They have to just muddle through it just like we did, because that's what life is. It's not perfect.
Mud. So with Shadow's Edge, we did a lot of research into resilience, as you know, and we found that there are certain things that can positively impact our strength, like, a positive self-identity, optimism maybe. And one of the most important ones, also connection to others. But especially when you're not doing well, then connection can really be tricky, right? Because even if you know that this might be something that's good for you, or it can be scary, it can be, you can feel down, you may not feel like connecting with other people. What are simple things that you think can help young people specifically to connect with others?
Right. I think what you're speaking to is what I would consider your defense mechanism. So being aware of what you do when you're feeling emotionally overwhelmed. So for me, you're speaking directly my language, because that is what I do. I want to go into a room and just be by myself with my dogs for a little bit. Like, I want to disconnect when I'm feeling emotionally overwhelmed. but that doesn't always help me get through the emotional overwhelm. Sometimes that just makes me stay in it longer because I'm not able to work through it just by myself. So I know that about myself. So I know, shutting down, I know, denying, all of those pieces are your emotional defenses. So just being aware that when I know that I want to go into my room and eat ruffled potato chips with sour cream, that something's probably wrong. So what I need to do is, instead of going into the room with my ruffles, I need to actually stay in the living room, and I need to close my computer, and I need to
With your
talk to God.
ruffles.
With my ruffles, very important. It's so funny, I actually do. When I feel overwhelmed and stressed, I can feel it, like my mouth waters, like I crave specifically ruffles potato chips. So again, these are just your awareness, your triggers. So I know now what I need to do is exactly what you're saying. I need to connect with my friends, I need to connect with my partner, with my kids, so that I can change or shift what I'm feeling. So that's me. So as an adult in my house, I model that, like, this is what I want to do, but here's what I'm going to do, and here's why. So I expressly talk about it with my family. And then for the kids, sometimes you have to say no. So my teenage son, like, he'll get home from playing Ultimate, and it's hard for him to breathe in his mask, and he hates running around in the cold with the mask on. And he comes in, and he might be feeling discouraged, he might be feeling upset, and he'll want to go right to his room and close his door. And I have to stand in front of him and say, buddy, no, not quite yet. Like, here's why. I need you to come sit with me and just sort of talk through what's going on, because it looks like, by your face, that something happened during practice. Or, like, I would just love to learn a little bit more. Sometimes I don't even talk that much. I say, hey, bud, come over here and help me cook a little bit of, HelloFresh meal or whatever. And then as we're sitting there quietly, he'll be calming down, and then he'll be in a place to talk. So sometimes it's almost like parallel play, where I'll just encourage them or try to be in the same room as them, even though they say they don't want it. So leaning in. So in terms of things like Shadow's Edge, the reason why I think it's really helpful too is because the gamification. So kids want to engage with it because it is a game. It does have that game aspect. It's not completely threatening and daunting. Like, whenever I give my kids, I even come up with these really cool journals, but look how blank it is. Because I'm like, oh, look, you're into space. Here's a space journal. And it's just daunting to open up, to a blank page. So we want to do everything we can to encourage kids to reflect, put language to how they're feeling, and make it as easy as possible. So meet them at their level, which is apps, which is technology, which is games. So if that's what it needs, we need to make that piece easy, because the emotional piece is already hard.
And I think that maybe also goes into a little bit of a similar topic with proactive coping, right? If you give them the tools that they're comfortable in, then that also might encourage them to take a more active role in working through what they're going through. Would that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So as a former teacher, if someone, let's just say, has difficulty reading and understanding what they've read, and we're starting a new topic like the Civil War, the first thing I would do would be sure that we watched a video that included, information or images of the Civil War, that we listened to a podcast that include reflections of different points of views before we gave the written print. Because for that student, the written print is the hardest for them to access. So what I'm trying to say is, emotionally being in touch with how you're feeling, how you're doing, reflecting on how you're feeling, is like that Civil War. It's like the new information. So what we need to do as parents and as supporters of children is we need to make it as easy as possible for them to have those opportunities to reflect, to grow, to set goals, to challenge themselves, so that access isn't the issue. What we try to do, and then we'll ramp it up. So as they get older, the hope would be you had this great experience here with Shadow's Edge, or with some other, reflection pieces. Now we can apply it to a blank page. Now that you're 20, now that you're, in college, this is what can it look like, and we can apply it a little bit nicer, a little cleaner.
So what are some things that parents can do to support their children without actually, really, you talked about leaning in, but at some point it can also become intrusive, right? How do you recognize as a parent that that's what you're doing, that you're overstepping before, your teen or your young person explodes on you?
I just love middle school and high schoolers so much. I'm like, bring on the explosion. And I know that
I love
that's
working with you. I've got tons of nephews and nieces, and they're all in the teenage age range, and I love it.
I do too. So I think that we have to remember, in terms of Erickson, development of your identity, who you are for a preteen, a teenager, separate from their family of origin is critical. So in order to have their own identity, they need to know themselves. They need to have things about themselves that they know are special or unique, that they're proud of. That those are, if we're watching the movie Inside Out, those are the islands of personality. Like, this is all of your core memories, all of these experiences have created these pieces of your personality that make you unique. Once the child is feeling like they've developed that they understand that about themselves, they're much more willing to allow someone come in and try something, saying like, oh, I found this app, or I found this, really cool space journal. Do you want to try it? And Leaf knows his island, my son knows his islands of personality well enough that, he'll say thank you and he'll go through those motions, and then it'll suddenly end up in my backpack because he knows that I really bought it for myself. What I'm trying to say is that they're able to sort of push back a little bit more. So as a parent, it is a little bit of trial and error. And if you're leaning in too much, look for the response. They'll give it to you to say, gently back off, mom or dad, or, whomever, little sister or whatnot. So the piece that is tricky is that if you consistently keep leaning in the same way for the same thing, that's when the person starts to feel like, this idea of codependency, or this idea of I can't do the dishes. Sure you can, you just haven't had the opportunity to, because I'm always the one doing them. Come on over, let's do the dishes. So really trying to encourage those places where they're going to mess up, but it's going to be okay and safe, so that they don't reach out and mess up, like when they're driving or when they're doing something that truly has a big consequence. So just watching the response, I always think, is the best piece. So in the article, we talked about the connection. So your child, like, watch, they're going to yo-yo, just like we talked about, from the deep end to the shore to the deep end. Like, just be there at the shore when they need you, and then let them go off to the deep end, so they can learn and grow.
And I think that also goes into emotional regulation, right? Where none of us is evenly positive all of the time, even if we do portray that to the outside world. But being able to recognize that, I think, is tricky, not just for people around you, but also for yourself. How can you learn to recognize those things a little bit better? And what would you tell a young person directly?
The first thing I tell my students very clearly and directly, even in kindergarten, is I'm not going to change your emotion. Like, if you're feeling angry, that's okay. I can handle that. I see that you're angry. So I just model a lot of, I hear what you're saying. I see that you're angry. I'm right here. I'm right here with you. I don't try to manipulate or make a child have a good day. I don't try to make them less or make them not afraid. What I try to do is wrap them in love, wrap them in security, so that they feel less angry, they feel less afraid, so that they're then able to reflect and talk about it. And again, that integration between what it was that was making you afraid, so the scary ghost outside our neighbor's house, and how it made you feel. And once we start to create those emotional connections with our lived experience, that scary ghost is no longer as activating. It's no longer as big of a trigger. The child begins to be able to walk by the house without a lot of fear. So my biggest advice is, as parents of any age person, or as person in a relationship, don't change the emotion, but engage with it when the person is feeling in that 0 to 5 range, so that you both can better understand it, so that you don't get into places where you're saying things when you're not thinking, when you're feeling so big that you are really dysregulated. So a child would be having a tantrum, or a teenager would be storming into their room or out of the house. Really trying to stay in that 0 to 5 range where the discussions take place.
I think that's a really interesting point also that you said, that you just sort of went on from that, but I want to come back to that a little bit. So you talked about lived experiences. We had yesterday and this whole weekend, we were filming teens on the street here in Europe and asking them about their mental health, about, you know, what they talk about and all these types of questions that we're talking about now. And what I found really interesting, amongst a lot of comments, but one of the ladies that we interviewed, I think she's 17. She said, well, you know, I'm really pissed off about COVID and what's happening, and that we're now potentially, you know, really going back into more of a lockdown type situation. And the first time I did a lot of journaling, a lot of writing, and all those kinds of things to get through it. And so now in hindsight, since I've lived that once, at least now I know what it's like. And I think that's something that's really maybe also valuable, right, for young people. How can you help them understand that they may not have gone through the experience, and obviously you as a parent may have, but that's usually less welcomed, right? If you say, well, don't make the mistakes I did, but how can you let them know that they too can get through those situations?
So I love Dan Siegel for this question, I think. So Dan Siegel wrote a book, it's called The Whole Brain Child. And he really talks about don't address what the child is saying, but address what they're feeling or needing. So the example is when you're going to put the child to bed, you read the story, you kissed them 5 times, you did 3 circles, you know, the whole bedtime ritual stuff. So whatever, you're at the end, you're ready to leave the room, and the child suddenly says that they're thirsty. Are they really thirsty, or do they just need another second of connection? So my point with this is, no, you may not have experienced a pandemic. Who has? I haven't. However, you've experienced difficult situations, or you've experienced, you know, during the summer when we went camping and we were just with our family, you know, we were pretty isolated and you missed your friends. But how did we get through it? What worked? So what we're trying to do is address the emotional experience or the need, the connection that perhaps that child was talking about in terms of their anger. And how can we meet that need, or how can we meet that emotional experience, and peel away the facts? So listen with your gut and not to the words, because that's where you're going to be able to sort of help the child reflect on the fact that they've gotten through 3 months without connecting with their friends before. And here's what works. So let's do that again. Or they've gotten through a really hard situation, where they felt really scared for their health. How did we do it last time? You know, here's what we'll do again. Because you're never going to meet apple for apple, but you will meet a similar emotional experience or similar lived experience, even if it's dialed down. It could be very simple as like disappointment. So you know, my children are very into rock climbing, and their competitive season is going to look very different. And we've never experienced that before. It's going to be really hard. But what have we experienced before as a family that has been difficult or a letdown from what we expected? We have tons of those every day. So just reflecting on that, like we've gotten through this similar feeling or similar, you know, esque situation, and we'll get through this because we'll come together. We've got this. That's the, whenever I think of trying to help someone, is the idea that you're stronger than you realize. You've got this, and I'm here with you. I think is so powerful, rather than trying to force a child or force an adult or force anyone to be happy or to, you know, be positive all the time. I think that's where it gets really toxic, because it feels like there's a big disconnect between the outer world and what they're feeling and what they're being asked to show. And I do think a lot of times when, you know, even in schools, when we see a child who's sad, we want them to be happy. You know, I'll even see people like try to tickle someone into being happy. And it's okay to just sit with someone when they're sad and just be sad with them. And for them to be able then to know that when they're in college and they're feeling really sad, you're the first person they want to call, because you know they'll just sit there with them. You won't get mad at the person who, you know, hurt them or whatever. You'll just be there for them. That's such an important message.
And so what if one of those teens would be really resistant to that idea of doing something about it or working around it? We all know what that can be like, right? What would you tell them? What can we tell them as parents? You know, how can we even tell them?
Yeah, that's such a great point. So it doesn't even have to be a teen. I have an experience myself. So my son, when he was 2, went through 2 major brain surgeries, and after the surgeries, he had to wear a compression bandage around his head for a long period of time. And, I was getting my PhD in psychology. I worked with kids my entire life. I thought I could help our family and help him move through this huge life event, this huge trauma, a lot of time in the hospital. And I thought things were okay. But then at 3, he went to ride a bike. We put a bike helmet on him and he lost it. He like went into the fetal position, and it was just overwhelming. And it was overwhelming for me because I was right there in it with him. So sometimes even the most loving, even the most educated, even the most wonderful situations, you need to reach out and get outside support and help. So that's exactly what I did. Is I reached out to a wonderful child therapist, and he went in and did some EMDR. By the second session, kids are so resilient. By the second session, she was doing EMDR, the bilateral stimulation, and had his helmet on him. By the third one, he was like, yeah, done. Like, I'm cool. Like, I can wear it. He wears a helmet now, climbing, biking, everything. So sometimes when it gets to be to the point where it's just, you're either part of the situation with them, feeling the emotion with them, or, so you don't have that outside perspective, or it's just so big and you just need help. That's okay. Reaching out. There's online tools now. So there's some great therapy sites that you can see a therapist online, as well as obviously finding someone local and seeing a person can help not just the teen, but can help the whole family dynamic, because it'll take that off the plate, and you can let that expert handle it.
And so the next step, obviously, from then resisting is also then what if they really block themselves up? Because, sometimes they can walk out and just really not talk to you. Not that you can then change their mind necessarily, but how could you as a parent make sure that they at least get the support that they need, even if it's not from you?
Yeah. So again, my heart goes out to families, because especially during this time, it's such big emotion. Um, So again, when someone's in that 5 to 10 range, when they're feeling something incredibly strong, they can't necessarily think or self-regulate or reflect. So if a teenager is storming out of the house, that's not the time to grab them and try to have a heart-to-heart conversation. They need to self-regulate. So, and you as an adult have to prioritize safety. So a storming teen going into a car is not an option. So firm, loving boundaries in those situations when the person is dysregulated is exactly what needs to happen. So do you need to physically remove the car keys? Perhaps. Do you need to give them a bear hug while you're removing the car keys? Perhaps. No, that's not ideal, and that's not what I want for anyone, but that's reality sometimes. That's real life. Once we get calm, once we get into that regulated piece, then you can have those deeper conversations of, this didn't work. What can we do next time? You can't go out the front door. That's a no. What can you do? And again, having them be part of the conversation around control, around what will work for you. I could leave the house, or I could leave your room, or I could, like, you can do these 12 different things, but you can't do this, this, and this because it's a safety concern. So strike when the iron's hot. So get the person into that 5 to 10 range, calm them, get them, so that they can think, they can be online, and then back up and try to untangle the situation and figure out where you want to step in to do things differently as a team. But I can't say enough. My heart goes out to, like, the most loving, wonderful, beautiful situations have blowups like this. It's not a reflection on your parenting. It's not a reflection on your teen or on how they're going to live their life. It's a reflection of that one little moment. And you can handle it, and they can handle it. It's just that right now they might have to hear a no, and they might have to bounce off that boundary and get really angry at you, for you then to be able to unpack it to do it better next time.
In today's world, I find that teens are comparing themselves so much to other people. And of course, with social media, everybody puts on a strong face. Everybody looks great. And therefore, it's really tough to see yourself versus others, because some people may be going through cancer, or having, a friend die, or having like shooting or racism happen, whereas other people are just going through a rough time because, they had a bad test in school. How do you help, young people see that even with the resilience, that's not necessarily that one problem is worse than the other, because the feelings are real. How do you support that? How do you see that moving forward?
Right. So I think in terms of the people who are supporting the teen or the person, it's important to have that Dan Siegel attitude of what is their lived experience, pulling away from the factual events that led to that lived experience, because that's what you really need to or deal with, or or soothe or connect with. Um, as a parent, it's so, you have to always remember, until your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain, really gets online, this is your ability to those executive functioning skills, to be able to think of yourself in the future, to be able to really effectively reflect onto yourself. That doesn't come online for girls until like 18 to 21, and for boys it's like 21 to 26. So you as a parent, that's why those firm loving boundaries are so critical, because they literally can't they think they are invincible. They think what they're feeling in the moment is catastrophic, is going to be how they're going to feel forever. And if you come in, just like we talked about before, and say, no, that's not the case, they're going to immediately put up a wall. You have to go in to where they're at, meet them where they're at, and say, tell me more, help me understand, explain. And just let them keep trying to work with putting the words to how their body is feeling, so that it does feel like the emotion is more manageable. It doesn't feel quite as out of control. And again, if that feels hard, if that feels like you're also going through a loss, or you're also experiencing their cancer or whatnot, outside support or help is so critical. Because if you're both in the middle of something, you really need that perspective to come in to help all of you buoy a little bit. And that's not, it's not a failure. It's actually the opposite. It's admitting that even in hard situations, you have resources in the community that can help you. Even, 40 years from now, if I'm not here, here's how you call these numbers, and here's how you get the support and help you need. And that means that you are strong, because you can do these things.
How does a person's character play into this? How does help also to build resilience?
Yeah, so again, different people look at character differently. I see character in my mind still as the silly inside out islands of personality. So this idea that who you are is partially nature, so partially some of those, predispositions, but it's also a whole lot of nurture. It's a whole lot of those huge core memories, those big parts of, as a family, this is what we believe in. So reflecting on those value pieces. So is it okay to say a naughty word when, I ran over my toe? Maybe. Would it ever be okay to say that angrily towards someone? Not in our family. Like that, and having children as they get older understand those nuances, that things aren't black and white. Like, swear words aren't always wrong, just as they're not always right. Like they're somewhere in the middle. And here's how I can help you sort of perceive that gray area. And it is about, like you were saying, character, or it's about your personality or your value system. And here's our family value system. And as you're a preteen, as you're a teenager, you have to decide which one of those things you're going to pick and choose from. Having said that, maybe this is wrong, I shouldn't be admitting this, but like with my son Leif, who's a freshman, like I'll say, like, you have to decide where your love is, where your passions are, where your values are. And I encourage him to engage in that struggle. But then I do set a hard boundary of, you never, like, you will never be purposefully unkind to your sister. She's someone who's always going to be in your life. She's someone, even in difficult situations, you have to figure out how to work the relationship or whatnot. So I do have firm no's, and whether or not he fully integrates those values into his value system, I'm not sure, but I hope he loves and respects me and my husband enough that he does. But we'll see, right? 10 years, interview me again.
We'll do a webinar again.
There we go. Maybe a hologram.
So with Shadow's Edge, we did some of these things that you said we actually played with on a fun way. I mean, you can see in the background for all of the people attending that's part of the world of Shadow's Edge. So the game world that you come in when you enter this city that's been hit by a storm, and through writing in a journal and through are expressing yourself through art, you actually bring that city back to life again. So you heal that inner part of the city, and you help the characters you meet in the game make themselves and make their city healthy again by working on yourself, by working through the process of dealing with hard stuff in your life. And we had a long discussion and long deliberation also with the help of our teams to figure out, if we do things like graffiti in the game, as you can see in the background, do we exclude swear words, for example, right? But then sometimes, as you say, anger can come up, and it might be all right, because maybe sometimes it's just the situation. What are some things that you have seen, because you've seen obviously Shadow's Edge as well, in Shadow's Edge, but also in other tools? What are things where you think that something negative like swearing, but also maybe some other things, have been used to actually positively help with building resilience? Do you have any of those examples?
That's a great question. So much of it is situational. And I really try, even for young children, to get really away from total thinking. So always and never. So if I ever hear myself saying those words or hear someone else saying those words, I want to stop for a minute and try to get in. Like, is that truly always true? Like, my teacher hates me, or, like these blanket statements, because again, their amygdala is on fire. So they're feeling things very passionately, and the prefrontal cortex is offline, so they're not able necessarily to have that perspective piece. They are feeling these things very deeply and very passionately. And the key is, when the iron is cold, to use things like the imagery that you're suggesting with Shadow's Edge, or metaphors or things like that, to sort of help them be able to gain the perspective that maybe it's not just this whole extreme thinking. Maybe there are a whole bunch of gray areas. And believe it or not, teens and preteens love engaging in that gray area. They love engaging in debate. They love arguing with you as to why 10 o'clock is too early and 11 o'clock would be a better curfew. So instead of always saying, no, it's 10 o'clock, engage in the conversation and see if you can come up with, like, if they have a perspective that might change your mind. That being said, firm, loving, consistent boundaries are key. So there's going to be certain things that are a no and a hard no, and they have to be able to accept and handle, just like we accept and handle hard no's in our lives all the time. But there are a whole bunch of things that as a parent I think are a no, but maybe I could engage in the conversation, and that might be really fun. So that's where I would look for. I would look for those opportunities, and I would try, just like the toddler tying their shoe, try to take time to engage with my teen or preteen with those little opportunities where they have a little more control in their life. Or maybe that hard, swearing's always wrong. When I hear always, maybe it's not always, like, and ask them, like, as we're driving in the car, is swearing always wrong? Like, what do you guys think? And just sort of playing with it a little bit is really fun, and it really helps teens and preteens develop, again, that sense of value system for themselves. Because in the car, my daughter might say yes to something and my son might say no. This just happened, actually. Driving to school, we were talking about should we talk about the election and who we're voting for? And my son was like, yeah, I love these conversations. It changes my point of view. I hear other people and I learn about them. I learn about what they care about, their values. And my daughter was like, no, it's totally wastes so much time. It takes, like, it's just, everybody ends up mad at each other, and then you have to debrief on that, and it's such a pain in the neck. And yes, they're very different. They're 2 years apart in terms of age, so that has something to do with it. But the debate is actually really rich. And it's also wonderful for both of them to feel like they can stand in their opinion, and that's okay. They can have different opinions and still love each other, and they can both be right, because there's no right or wrong. It's all gray. Like, it, so let's play with it.
Excellent. So we only have 2-3 minutes left. So I just want to do a quick ask again to any of the participants if you have any questions. We had some in the chat and we answered those, but also if you just want to ask a question, you just raise your hand and then we can bring you in on this, because we do have a few minutes left. Otherwise, of course, we also have this live on Facebook, and we'll record it and we'll upload it to YouTube if you want to share that with others. If you'd like to have a certificate of participation, then let us know as well. We can make sure of that. And so waiting for people to potentially have another question, I do have one last question, Kristi. What are what's your advice on resources that may be really helpful for parents on the subject of resilience, that may be fun and engaging, but also very helpful?
I hope this doesn't frustrate you or frustrate anyone too much, but honestly, if you want me to be completely truthful, I think the best thing you can do as someone who loves or cares about a young person is to fail spectacularly often in front of them and own it. And have them see you work through the frustration, the difficult emotion, have them see you get back on and try again. So if you want to take a risk and ask for that promotion, or you go to a rock climbing gym and you're just horrible, like, don't just put a smiley face on it. Be like, oh my gosh, like, I thought I was so strong. I've been working out. What is going on? Like, this is so frustrating. It sounds so simple, but if they love and care about someone, if they're in a relationship with someone and they see you willing to take risks, they see you pushing that comfort zone, they see you reflecting on it, labeling it, working through those difficult emotions, they will gain the confidence that I too am strong. I too can handle this. I'm their son or daughter, I'm their best friend, or I'm their niece or nephew. Like, I've got this. I'm going to be just like that person. I think, to me, that's the biggest piece. It's not something you can buy. It's not something, you have to explicitly teach. It's just fail spectacularly all the time, as often as you can, and then tell them about it and laugh about it in the end. And then when they fail, when they fall down, you're right there with them. And oh my gosh, let's figure this out, because I was really bad at that too when I was your age. So I'm sorry, that's a little frustrating.
So we had a great question from Andrea, and you have just answered it with what you said last. She was asking, what are resources for parents to acknowledge their own trauma, and then how can they be resilient in the face of adversity? Is there anything you want to add to what you said before to answer this question?
I do want to acknowledge that as adults, that's a lot harder than children, because we have more history. So, and not just our history, but also like intergenerational history. So things like the forest fire might bring up for me not just danger, but also this idea that, like, if my family has to evacuate, we won't have resources. And perhaps, like, in my life, in my childhood, not having resources, not having enough is something that's really triggering for me, because I have all of these other time periods when I felt that emotion that I wasn't going to be able to provide or have enough. So as adults, when I say failing spectacularly, it's actually really hard, because we're nervous. Like, what if we pick that scab? What else is going to come up? So we do have to do our own work. We do have to work on our own traumas so that we feel safe enough with our family to be able to put ourselves out there like that without falling apart, because you don't want to push yourself so much that they see you completely, melted down. You want to, that gentle risk, that gentle out of your comfort zone and then back in. So I hate to say it, but it's the hard work of, dealing with your own baggage, so that it's not so, it's more integrated.
All right. Well, with that, we've finished the hour. So I want to thank you very, very much that you were on our webinar again, and also for the great blog article that's on the our website as well, the Digging Deep project. So diggingdeep.org/blog, and you will find her blog on there. The game is available on the App Store and on Google Play if you want to try that out. It's completely free. We're a nonprofit organization, so we just want to make sure that those resources are available to people for free, and it can be played on Apple and on Google devices. So feel free to go to the App Store and Google Play and just download it and play around with it. There's no charge, no purchases in the game, nothing like that. It's just a free resource. So I want to thank all of our participants for joining us here. And we hope to see you next month. Lacey, Lacey is the person in the back end helping with all of the questions and stuff. Can you let me know what's the subject again for next month?
I need to check on that, but I believe it's art therapy.
Yes, I think so too. So we'd love to see you again for next month's webinar. We'll announce it again in the newsletters, of course, and also on our social media at diggingdeep.org. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Kristi, for helping out today as well. Bye, everybody.
Bye.